Hello, and a very warm welcome to札幌学院University's Community College, Global Issues in English. Today's topic is internationalism. Before we begin, I recommend that you visit this site where you can find some vocabulary support and some language exercises which will help you with the topic. The first thing I want to think about is, are you an international person? Do you think you are an international person? For example, how many international connections have you made in the last 24 hours? Perhaps you listened to some Korean pop music or watched a Korean drama. Perhaps you had steak from Australia with your meal last night, or some French wine, or something like that. How many international connections have you made in the last 24 hours? All right, first of all, I'd like to think about food. How much of Japan's food is imported, do you think? Do you think it's 35%, 60%, or 72%? The answer is 60%. So Japan imports a lot of the food that it needs. In fact, Japan is the #1 country in the OECD nations for food imports. Now let's think about different kinds of food. For example, we can find bananas. Very clearly they come from the Philippines or Ecuador, coffee from Brazil or Vietnam, and these are very easy to understand. Let's think about soybeans, perhaps a little more tricky. Soybeans very popular in Japanese food, for tofu, for natto, for miso, for soy sauce. How much of soybeans do you think is imported? What percent does Japan import? Do you think it's 46%, 76%, or 95%? The answer is 95%. So a huge amount of the soybeans that Japan consumes is imported. Most of it is fed to animals, but some is fed to humans. And of course, it's a surprise that so much Japanese food comes from other countries. And the soybeans come from the United States, come from Brazil, and they come from Canada. Next, how about bread and toast? Bread and toast made, of course, from wheat. Where do you think the wheat comes from? And what percent of its wheat does Japan import, do you think? Do you think it's 45%, 75%, or 90%? And the answer is 90%. So again, Japan imports almost all of its wheat that it uses in its food. And where does it come from? 50% of Japan's wheat comes from the United States, 31% from Canada, 16% from Australia, and from other countries too. This comes as a surprise to people living in Hokkaido, because Hokkaido produces 207% of its calorie needs. Hokkaido is a very rich and fertile island. However, if we think about Japan as a whole country, the imports are much larger. Next, I'd like to think about energy. So quiz, how much of its energy does Japan import? 72%, 81%, 87%. Whichever it is, it's a large number. The answer is 87%. So our electricity, our cars, our heating are generally imported from other countries. Let's look at the energy mix that is imported. We can see that almost all of the imports, 87%, are fossil fuels made up of coal and oil and gas, and only the remaining 13% is domestically produced. And when we look, this is perhaps a little difficult to see, but we look at the oil. It comes from Saudi Arabia, from the UAE, from Russia, Qatar, Kuwait, Iran, and other countries. The gas, most of Japan's gas comes from Australia, Malaysia, Qatar, Russia, Indonesia, UAE, etc., etc. And the coal, rather difficult to see on this screen, the coal, mostly the blue, is from Australia, Indonesia, Russia, Canada, and China. So really, most of Japan's energy depends on other countries. One more thing to think about, perhaps, is the clothes that you wear. For example, my shirt was made in China, my shoes were made in Cambodia, I imagine your clothes were made in different parts of the world too. In winter, I have a nice wool hat that I wear on my head. Where did the wool come from? I don't know. Perhaps it came from Australia or from New Zealand or from some other country. When we think about where our things come from or what is imported, we should think also about who produces them. Who is this farmer in Brazil on the left? Who is this oil engineer in the middle on the right? Who is this young lady in a garment factory in Cambodia? They are all part of our economic family, and we should be curious about their lifestyles, their families, their health, and other issues. Some other surprises. Last month I changed my light in my home, and I found that it was made in Bangladesh. I have a little battery made by Panasonic, a Japanese company, but it was made in Indonesia. My bicycle was made in Taiwan. The bicycle tires were made in France. My watch, again a Japanese watch, but it was made in Malaysia. And finally, what's the most surprising country in your international family? For example, living in Hokkaido, I love salmon. And when I go to the supermarket, I like to buy Hokkaido salmon. But sometimes I can't find it, so I buy salmon from Alaska, or from Chile, or from Russia. But one day I went into my local supermarket and I found some salmon from a rather surprising country. Where do you think my salmon came from? Do you think it came from Greenland? Do you think it came from Lesotho, this small country in the south of Africa? Do you think it came from Ireland in the west of Europe? The answer is it came from Lesotho. Very, very surprising. And that's another story I don't have time to tell you today, but it is very interesting. So my challenge to you is, which surprising countries can you find in your home? And one other thing, in the course of this very short talk, I have mentioned about 23 different countries. How many countries can you find in your house? And so, in answer to the first question that I asked you, are you an international person? The answer is absolutely yes. Thank you for watching. See you again.